Andor is not simply the title of a hit Star Wars television program. It also happens to be two of the most common conjunctions in the English language, and or. And though the two conjunctions serve very distinct purposes, many people confuse these two conjunctions and use them interchangeably in their writing. Therefore, it's important to take a look at how these conjunctions function and how you can distinguish them in your writing. The words and or often get confused with one another, and this is likely because they are both coordinating conjunctions. So, what are coordinating conjunctions? Well, coordinators are words that are used to link elements in a sentence. For example, they can be used to link clauses, nouns, elements, and any other parts of speech. However, it is important to note that coordinators frame the elements that they link as being equal syntactically. When linking itemized lists or clauses, people often use the words and or interchangeably. However, they do not serve the same purpose. So the question is, what is the difference between and or? The word and links two or more elements together. In this context, though, the elements are taken jointly. That is to say, the reader will see them as mutually inclusive. So for example, we can add items together, we can list items, and we can join items. The word or also links two or more elements together. The key difference, though, is that these elements are seen as alternatives. They are mutually exclusive, not inclusive to each other. So you'll have one or the other, but not both. And we often use this when we're framing alternatives, options, and possibilities. Let us take a look at some examples to see how the two words function in contrast to one another. If we're using the word and to add ideas together, we might say that Luthen is a gregarious antique dealer and a leader of the rebellion. And in this context, we see that he is both an antique dealer and a leader of the rebellion at the same time. And the word and therefore functions like a plus sign. If we're using or in this context, we would be introducing options. For example, Cassian might tell Kino that they can either die trying to take down the people who are oppressing them, or alternately, die giving the oppressors what they want. And in this context, the reader sees that you will either do the first option or do the second option, but not both because they are mutually exclusive. How might these differences manifest in an academic context? Well, let's say we're using the word and we say the variable was positively correlated with X and negatively correlated with Y. Now, in this context, the reader sees that the variable has two features. It is positively correlated with one phenomenon and negatively correlated with another phenomenon. And these two are mutually inclusive to each other. In contrast, if we're using or, we might say doctors could prescribe either clonazepam or diazepam. Now, in this context, the doctor will prescribe one or the other, but they will not prescribe both. Now, when we're listing, we will use the word and. Example, Luthen's Fondor Hallcraft is equipped with projectile launchers, a laser cannon, and a targeting computer. And now the reader sees that the Hallcraft has the projectile launchers, the laser cannon, and a targeting computer. All three of these, and the word and again functions like a plus sign. And as a result, the reader knows that all three features are present and are mutually inclusive to one another. Contrast, the word or would introduce an alternative. For example, would you prefer to have a blaster? Or would you prefer to have a lightsaber? In this context, you're going into battle and you're being given a choice of weapon. You can either use the blaster or the lightsaber. Now, in this context, you can have one, the blaster, or the other, the lightsaber, but you cannot have both because the two are mutually exclusive to each other as they are alternatives. Let's take a look at how these examples are manifest in an academic context. Here we have and we might say the symptoms include itching, burning, and soreness. In contrast for or, we might have a sentence like the participants were assigned to either the control group or the experimental group. Now let's take a look at these. For the first one with and, we have itching, burning, and soreness, and all three of them go together. Whereas for the or, these are alternatives. You're either going to be in the control group or you're going to be in the experimental group, one or the other, but not both. So again, with the and, all three items are mutually inclusive, but with or, they're mutually exclusive. It's either the control group or the experimental group, but not both. And finally, we have the word and joining elements together. For example, the rebels in Aldhani will infiltrate a garrison and Cassian Andor will join them. So in this context, we have the first element, which is the rebels from Aldhani, and then we have Cassian Andor joining them afterwards. And again, the word and here functions as a plus sign. It's adding these two together so that the reader can see that they are mutually inclusive to each other. In this context, though, or would be introducing different possibilities. Example, Cassian Andor may have a beard, or he may be clean shaven. And now, when the ISB is looking for the wanted man, their foot soldiers and stormtroopers will know that the wanted character may have a beard or he may be clean shaven, but he obviously won't be both because these two are mutually exclusive possibilities. How does this look in an academic context? Let's begin with and, where we join two items. Cognitive behavioral therapy and strength-based approaches can be used jointly. When we're showing alternative possibilities, we might write, we hypothesize that the variable will either be positively or negatively correlated with X. Now, when we're joining them, a social worker, for example, might see that cognitive behavioral therapy and strength-based approaches can be used jointly at the same time in conjunction with each other. However, when we're talking about our hypothesis, we're talking about one of two potential outcomes. It's either going to be positively correlated or negatively correlated with the phenomenon in question. This seems pretty straightforward, so what's so confusing about this? Well, the most problematic element is probably when we're introducing lists. So let's take a look at where the confusion comes in. Let's take a look at a hypothetical example. We're making a sandwich, and we're going to use the word and. The sandwich can include tomatoes, lettuce, and pickles. Now, we change the sentence up slightly, adding an or in place of the and. The sandwich can include tomatoes, lettuce, or pickles. So what's the difference here? Well, with and, we're saying the sandwich can include all three items. Whereas alternately with the or, we're saying it can include the tomatoes or the lettuce or the pickles. And this is where the confusion comes in part because the word and can be problematic as all three items might be taken as mutually inclusive, where the or says they're all mutually exclusive, and you may want to allow for a combination. So what if you want conjoining options that can be mutually inclusive? How do we phrase that? Well, practically speaking, we're still going to use the word and we might have to use a little bit more verbiage to clarify our position syntactically. Example, the sandwich can include any combination of tomatoes, lettuce, and pickles. And now the reader sees any combination of, and they see that all three of these can be mutually inclusive to each other because we use the word and, but that you could have alternating combinations of the three items. So let's do a quick summary. And or are both coordinating conjunctions, and as such, they can both be used to link equally weighted elements together. However, they serve two very different functions. The word and links two or more elements together, and these elements will be taken jointly as mutually inclusive. And again, we can use this when we're adding elements together, when we're listing mutually inclusive elements, or when we're joining mutually inclusive elements. Or is likewise used to link two or more elements together, but these elements are seen as alternatives, mutually exclusive. So you will have one or another, but not both or all. And again, we use these in contexts where we might be introducing alternatives, options, or possibilities. I hope that was both clear and useful. Should you have any questions, drop them in the comments section below, and we will be sure to get to them as soon as possible. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.